I was 12 years old when I learned that the world wasn't fair. It wasn't a lesson from a book or a scolding from a teacher. It was a lesson taught with the slam of a car door, the flash of a camera, and the sound of my father's heart breaking right in front of me. My world, up until that day, was built on two unshakable pillars. My mother's laughter, which could light up the darkest room, and my father, David, a man whose hands were always stained with grease and whose heart was always filled with pride. He was a mechanic, the best in our small town of Cedarbrook. He owned a small garage, Hale's Auto Repair. To everyone else, it was a place to get their brakes fixed. To me, it was a palace of wonders, filled with the smell of oil and gasoline, the sound of clanking metal, and my hero. I remember that Saturday like it was yesterday. I was helping him, which mostly meant handing him the wrong tools and getting in the way. He never minded. He'd smile, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners, and say, "Almost got it, Leo. You're a natural." That's when the shadows fell across the open garage door. Not one, not two, but three police cruisers. Their lights silent, but their presence screaming of trouble. Out stepped Sergeant Frank Miller. He was a giant of a man, a friend of my father's, or so we thought. He'd eaten at our table. My father had fixed his personal car for free more times than I could count. David Hale. Frank's voice was cold, a blade of ice. "We need you to come with us." My father stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Frank, what's this about?" "The Sterling Jewelry Store. It was robbed last night. The safe was cracked clean open." My father laughed, a nervous, confused sound. "Sterling, Frank, you know I don't know the first thing about safes. I fix cars." But Frank wasn't smiling. He nodded to one of his officers, who stepped forward with a clear evidence bag. Inside was a single, custom-made socket wrench. I recognized it instantly. My father had it specially engraved with his initials, DH. He told me it was a gift from my mother when he opened the shop. He called it his lucky charm. "We found this at the scene, David, wedged behind the safe." The color drained from my father's face. I saw it happen. I saw the confusion, then the dawning horror. That was stolen from my toolbox last week. I reported it." Frank's face was a mask of stone. "We have your report. We also have a witness who places your van a block away from the store at 3 in the morning. It was a lie, a complete and utter lie. My father was home. He was always home. We'd watched a movie together. But the evidence, the wrench, the so-called witness, it was a net tightening around him, and he was being pulled into a deep, dark ocean." I watched as Frank Miller, our family friend, put handcuffs on my father's wrists, those strong, honest hands that had held mine, that had fixed my bike, that had built our life, now bound in cold, hard metal. My father looked at me just before they pushed his head down into the cruiser. His eyes, they weren't scared. They were sorry. He looked at me, his 12-year-old son, and his eyes said, "I'm so sorry you have to see this." That was the moment my childhood ended, the day the hero fell. And as the police car drove away, taking my father with it, a new cold feeling began to grow in the pit of my stomach, a seed of a promise, a vow. Someone had done this. Someone had torn my family apart, and I would find out who.
The trial was a circus, and my father was the main attraction. The prosecution painted him as a desperate man, a small business owner drowning in debt, willing to do anything to save his shop. The debt part was true. Business had been slow. But the desperation they described? That wasn't my father. The star witness was Frank Miller. He stood in that courtroom, his uniform pressed, his voice steady and confident. He testified about finding the wrench. He spoke about my father's financial motives. He presented the credible witness statement. He was the picture of a dedicated officer, just doing his job, however painful it was. I sat in that hard wooden bench, my mother's hand clutching mine so tightly it hurt. We were drowning in a sea of legal words we didn't understand. But we understood the looks on the jurors' faces. They believed Frank. Why wouldn't they? He was a sergeant, a pillar of the community. My father's lawyer fought hard, but it was like trying to hold back the tide with a bucket. The evidence was too neat, too perfect. The wrench, the witness, the van, it all pointed to one man, David Hale. The verdict, guilty. The sound of the gavel hitting the wood was like a gunshot in the silent courtroom. It echoed, and it shattered what was left of our world. My mother let out a small, broken cry, a sound I will never forget. My father just stood there, his shoulders slumped, the fight completely gone from him. He looked back at us one last time before they led him away, and the light in his eyes was gone, extinguished. A month after he was sent to prison, we had to close the garage. Without my father, it was just a building filled with ghosts. The bank took it. They took our house too. My mother and I moved into a small, cramped apartment on the wrong side of town. She aged 10 years in 10 months. Her laughter was gone, replaced by a constant, weary silence. We visited my father when we could. Each visit was harder than the last. Prison was breaking him, piece by piece. His hands, once so skilled, now had a slight tremble. His spirit, which was so bright, was fading. He always asked about me, about school. He told me to be strong, to take care of my mother. But during one visit, he leaned close to the glass, his voice a low, desperate whisper. "Leo," he said, his breath fogging the barrier between us. "I didn't do this. You have to believe me. Frank," he looked me right in the eye. He knew. That was the moment the seed inside me sprouted. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a mission. Frank knew. What did he know? Did he know my father was innocent? Was he part of the setup? I started reading. I read every newspaper article about the robbery, about the trial. I went to the public library and looked at books on police procedure, on evidence. I became obsessed. The case was cold for everyone else, but for me, it was a fire, burning day and night. I saw Frank Miller sometimes around town. He'd been promoted. He was a lieutenant now. He drove a nicer car. He lived in a bigger house. He was living his best life, while ours was in ruins. On my 18th birthday, I didn't go out with friends. I sat alone in my room, and I made a decision. A life-changing decision. I was going to join the Cedar Brook Police Department. My mother was horrified. "How can you? After what they did to your father?" I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see a broken woman. I saw my motive. "That's exactly why, Mom," I said, my voice calm, steady. "They think the story is over. They think we're defeated, but to find the truth, I have to get inside. I have to walk the same halls as the man who destroyed us." I wasn't just joining the police. I was going to war. And my weapon would be the very badge Frank Miller disgraced.
The police academy was the hardest thing I've ever done. It wasn't the physical training, though that was brutal. It was the mental game. I had to pretend. I had to wear the uniform, learn the protocols, and swear an oath to uphold the law, all while knowing that the man I believed was a criminal was wearing the same uniform just a few miles away. I had to be the perfect cadet. Eager, respectful, clean-cut. I asked all the right questions. I volunteered for everything. I made sure my name was known, but for all the right reasons. Leo Hale, dedicated, sharp, a future asset to the force. And during every class on evidence collection, every lecture on ethics, every discussion on witness testimony, my mind was racing. This is how they did it. This is how they built the lie. When I graduated at the top of my class, I requested my first assignment, Cedarbrook, specifically the Property and Evidence Division. It was a desk job, mostly paperwork. Most rookies wanted the excitement of patrol, the adrenaline of the streets. They thought I was crazy, but I had a plan. To find the cracks in a 10-year-old case, I needed to start where the evidence lived. My first day on the job, I walked into the precinct. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. The walls felt like they were closing in. And then I saw him, Frank Miller. He was older, heavier, with more gray in his hair now and a captain's bars on his collar. He was holding court in the briefing room, laughing, the center of attention. He saw me, the new kid, and gave me a nod, a professional, impersonal nod. There was no flicker of recognition. To him, I was just another fresh-faced recruit. The son of the felon he put away was distant memory, if he was a memory at all. That was good. I needed to be invisible. My supervisor in the evidence room was a weary, kind man named Carl. He'd been on the force for 40 years and was counting down the days to his pension. He was happy to have someone to do the grunt work. "Don't get excited, kid," he said, showing me the labyrinth of shelves and lockers. "Most of this stuff is just collecting dust, stories that are over." But not all of them, I thought. For months, I was a model employee. I organized, I filed, I logged. I made Carl coffee. I earned his trust. I learned the system inside and out. And I waited. I waited for the right moment, for a time when Carl was on vacation or out sick, and the room was mine alone. That moment came on a rainy Tuesday. Carl was at a dentist appointment. The precinct was quiet. My hands were sweating as I navigated the old digital archive system. I typed in the case number I knew by heart. CB-PD-08-447. The Sterling robbery. The file appeared on the screen. My breath hitched. This was it. The official record. The lie. Documented. I started cross-referencing. The evidence log listed my father's wrench. It had been checked in by Officer Miller. But there was another piece of evidence I'd forgotten about. A partial fingerprint lifted from the inside of the safe's locking mechanism. It had never been identified. In the trial, they said it was likely smudged, unusable, a dead end. But what if it wasn't? I found the evidence locker for the case. It was in the long-term storage in the basement. The air was cold and smelled of damp concrete. My footsteps echoed. I found the box, my father's name printed on the side in bold letters. It felt like opening a coffin. There it was. The wrench, still in its evidence bag. Seeing it again after all these years sent a jolt of pure anger through me. The simple piece of metal had destroyed a life. Next to it was a smaller bag, the fingerprint card. I held it up to the dim light. It was a clear, clean print. Not smudged at all. Why did they say it was unusable? I had to get this print analyzed, but I couldn't do it through official channels. Frank would find out. I needed help. Outside help. That night, I did something reckless. I took out my phone and took a high-resolution photo of the fingerprint card. It was a violation of 1,000 protocols. It could get me fired, even arrested. But I was past caring. I had a name in mind. Sarah Chen. We'd been in the academy together. She was a whiz with technology, with databases, and she'd been kicked out in her final month for hacking into the system just to see if she could. She was brilliant, rebellious, and held a grudge against the department. She was perfect. I met her at a quiet, out-of-town coffee shop. I slid my phone across the table. "I need you to run this," I said quietly. "Through every database you can access. Quietly." She looked at the photo, then at me, her eyes sharp. This is from an active evidence locker, Leo. This is serious. It's from my father's case, I said. He was innocent, and I think someone in the department made sure he was found guilty. She studied my face for a long moment. She saw the desperation, the years of pain. She nodded slowly. Okay. For a good cause. I left the coffee shop, the rain soaking through my jacket. The game was on. I was inside the castle walls, and I had just found the first loose brick.
Waiting was agony. Every day I went to work, I felt Frank Miller's eyes on me. Was it my imagination, or was he paying more attention? Did he suspect something? I kept my head down, buried in paperwork, my heart a drumbeat of anxiety. I started digging deeper into the old files, using my position to look for patterns. I looked at other cases Frank had been involved in around that time. A series of small, unsolved burglaries. A few cases where evidence had gone missing. Nothing major, nothing that would raise a red flag on its own. But when you put them together, a picture started to form. A picture of someone who knew how to work the system. A week later, Sarah called. Her voice was tight with excitement. Meet me, now, same place. I practically ran to the coffee shop. She was already there, her laptop open. Her eyes were wide. Leo, she said, pointing at the screen, you're not going to believe this. The print, it's a match. My blood ran cold. Who? His name is Marcus Thorne, small-time crook, safecracker. He has a record a mile long. Busted for a dozen burglaries back in the day. But get this, he was arrested 2 weeks after your father's trial for a different job. The pieces slammed together in my mind with such force it made me dizzy. Marcus Thorne was the real robber. Frank Miller had arrested him. He hot his man, but he also had my father, already convicted, a neat and tidy solution to a messy problem. Why? There's more, Sarah said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Look at Thorne's arrest record. Who was the arresting officer in almost every one of his busts in the early 2000s? I looked at the screen. The name was there, again and again. Officer Frank Miller. Frank was Thorne's handler. He was the one who always brought him in. They had a history, a long one. And then the final, devastating piece. Sarah pulled up a financial record. It was for a shell company. Hard to trace, but she'd followed the digital breadcrumbs. Leo, look at this deposit. 5 days after the Sterling robbery. $50,000. And look where it came from. She zoomed in. The money had been funneled from an account linked to a known fence, a guy who moved stolen jewels. And the timing, it was perfect. Frank didn't just frame my father to close a case. He was in on it. He orchestrated it. He used his inside man, Marcus Thorne, to do the job. Then he planted the evidence to frame my father, an honest man with debt, the perfect fall guy. He arrested his own partner to tie up the loose ends, and he took the reward, a big fat payday, for himself. He'd been playing both sides all along. The betrayal was so much deeper, so much more vile than I had ever imagined. It wasn't just about putting an innocent man away. It was a business transaction. My father's life for a new car and a bigger house. Rage, white hot and blinding, flooded my system. I wanted to storm into Frank's office right then and there. I wanted to scream in his face to expose him for the monster he was. But I stopped myself. This wasn't enough. A fingerprint match from an illegal search and some shady financial records from a hacker wouldn't stand up in court. Frank would weasel out of it. He'd say I tampered with the evidence. He'd destroy me, and my father would never see justice. No, I needed a confession. I needed him to admit it, on record. But how do you get a sneak like Frank Miller to show his fangs? You present him with a bigger, juicier target. You make him greedy. You make him think he can win all over again. I looked at Sarah, my mind racing, a dangerous and perfect plan beginning to form. Sarah, I said, my voice cold and steady, how would you like to help me set a trap?
The plan was audacious. It was risky. If it failed, I would lose everything, but it was the only way. We called it Operation King's Fall, and the bait was a fictional score, the biggest one of Frank Miller's life. Sarah, using her skills, created a completely fake identity for me. I was Leo Mercer, a slick, ambitious businessman with ties to the criminal underworld. We built a digital ghost, social media profiles, a business website, everything. The story was this. A wealthy, eccentric client was storing a collection of uncut diamonds worth over $2 million in a high-security private vault in a disused warehouse on the outskirts of town. The security system was state-of-the-art, but my client had a man on the inside, me. I could get the blueprints. I could disable the alarms, but I needed a skilled crew. I needed a safecracker, and I needed a corrupt cop to provide a window of no patrols in the area and to help move the goods. Who better to provide both than Captain Frank Miller? The hard part was getting to him. I couldn't just walk up to him as Leo Hale, but as Leo Mercer, that was different. I started frequenting a bar I knew Frank liked to go to after a shift. I wore a suit. I talked loudly on my phone about big deals and logistical problems. I made sure I was a noticeable presence. It took 2 weeks before he took the bait. He slid onto the stool next to me. "Haven't seen you around before," he said, his voice a low rumble. He was still an intimidating figure, but I saw the greed in his eyes. He saw a chance. "Just in town on business," I said, playing my part perfectly. "Tough crowd here." We made small talk. I was careful, guarded. I let him think he was drawing me out. A few days later, we met again, and again. I slowly fed him pieces of the story, the diamonds, the vault, the inside man. I could see the wheels turning in his head. This was his chance. A big score, and then he could retire in style. No more police pension. Real wealth. "You'll need a good safecracker," he said one night, leaning in close. The smell of his cologne made my skin crawl. "I know a guy, the best. Name's Marcus Thorne." My heart leapt. He'd said the name. He'd walked right into the trap. "Is he reliable?" I asked, feigning concern. Frank chuckled, a low, ugly sound. "He's reliable as long as I'm the one holding his leash. He does what I say." There was the admission, the confirmation of their relationship. But it wasn't recorded. It wasn't enough. We set up a meeting, the four of us. Me, as Leo Mercer, Frank Miller, and Marcus Thorne. Sarah would be nearby in a van with audio and video equipment recording everything. The meeting was in a rented storage unit to make it feel authentic. Thorne was a wiry, nervous man with shifty eyes. He looked at Frank with a mixture of fear and respect. I laid out the plan, the fake vault blueprints, the schedule. I told them when the diamonds would be there. Frank's job was to ensure no police patrols came within a mile of the warehouse for a 2-hour window, and he would also provide a clean vehicle to transport the goods. "What's your cut?" Frank asked, his eyes narrowed. 20%. You and Thorne split the rest." Frank smiled. It was a predator smile. 40 for me, 40 for Thorne, 20 for you. You're just the information. We're taking the risk. I pretended to be angry, to negotiate. But inside, I was thrilled. He was taking the bait, hook and line. He was so consumed by his own greed that he didn't see the net closing around him. We agreed on the split. We shook hands. Frank's grip was firm, confident. He thought he was holding the hand of a partner. He was actually holding the hand of his judge, jury, and executioner. "One last thing," Frank said, his voice dropping to a deadly serious tone. "We do this clean, no mistakes. The last time I had to clean up a mess, a guy still rotten in prison for it. I don't like loose ends." The air left my lungs. He'd said it. He'd all but confessed to my father's framing. I forced a smile. No loose ends, I agreed. As I walked away from that storage unit, my entire body was trembling. Not from fear, from triumph. We had him. We had it all on tape. The conspiracy to commit a major robbery, the admission of his control over Thorne, and that chilling reference to my father. The trap was set. The spring was loaded. All that was left was to snap it shut.
The night of the heist was cold and clear. The stars were out, but they felt like a million watching eyes. My heart was a jackhammer in my chest. This was it, the end of a 10-year journey. Sarah was in her van, parked a block away, her equipment live streaming everything directly to a secure server. The district attorney's office was on standby. I had reached out to an old, trusted family friend who is now a high-ranking prosecutor. I gave him just enough information to have his team ready without spoiling the surprise. They were waiting for my signal. I stood in the shadows of the fake warehouse, wearing a wire. I was Leo Mercer, the criminal, but underneath the suit I was Leo Hale, the son, finally coming face to face with his monster. Right on time, headlights cut through the darkness. Frank's personal SUV, followed by a beat-up sedan. Marcus Thorne. They got out. Frank was dressed in dark clothing, looking every bit the criminal he was. "Everything's set," Frank grunted, all business. "Alarms are disabled," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "The vault's inside. Let's make this quick." We entered the empty warehouse. In the center was a prop vault we'd had built. It looked real, but it was just a hollow shell. Thorne got to work immediately, setting up his tools. The sound of his drilling echoed in the vast, empty space. Frank stood watch by the door, a smug look on his face. He was already counting his money. This was my moment. I walked over to him, my hands in my pockets. "You know, Frank," I said, my tone conversational, "this reminds me of an old story, the Sterling jewelry job. Heard of it?" Frank's head snapped towards me. His eyes narrowed. "What about it?" "Oh, just that it was a clean job. Or it would have been if the guy who did it hadn't been caught later. Marcus Thorne. Funny that." The color drained from Frank's face. He looked from me to Thorne and back again. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice dangerous. "Thorne was always your guy, wasn't he, Frank?" I continued, pressing harder. "You'd bust him, he'd do a little time, and you'd keep the relationship going. But the Sterling job is too big. You got greedy. You saw a chance for a huge payout. But you needed a fall guy. Someone no one would believe. Someone honest." Frank took a step towards me. "Shut your mouth. You planted the wrench. You faked the witness. You sent an innocent man to prison to cover for your partner here. And to line your own pockets. My father, Frank. David Hale." The name hung in the air between us, a ghost made real. Frank's eyes widened in shock and dawning horror. He recognized me now. He saw the 12-year-old boy in the face of the man standing before him. "You," he snarled, his hand moving towards his service weapon. "I wouldn't," I said calmly. I tapped the wire hidden under my shirt. "It's all being recorded, live. The DA is listening right now. It's over, Frank." For a moment, he was frozen. Then, a lifetime of arrogance took over. He laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You think this will stick? You're a kid playing a game. I'm a captain." "You're a criminal," I said, my voice cold as steel. "And you just confessed to it all. The conspiracy, your relationship with Thorne, the framing of my father. You're finished." That's when the world exploded into light and sound. The warehouse doors burst open. "Police, freeze!" Dozens of officers swarmed in, their guns drawn. But they weren't here for me. They surrounded Frank Miller and a terrified Marcus Thorne. The look on Frank's face was priceless.
It was a mixture of utter shock, blind rage, and finally the crushing weight of defeat. He saw his colleagues, the men and women who had respected him, now looking at him with disgust. His kingdom had crumbled in an instant. As they slopped the handcuffs on his wrists, the same cold, hard metal he'd put on my father, he locked eyes with me. There was no apology there, only hate. And I smiled. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated victory. The revenge was complete. Not with fists, not with violence, but with the one thing he thought he was above, the law.
The fallout was swift and public. The story was all over the news. Corrupt captain exposed, framed man to be freed. It was a media firestorm. Frank Miller and Marcus Thorne were charged with a list of crimes longer than my arm: corruption, conspiracy, perjury, framing an innocent man, and the original Sterling robbery. They both took plea deals to avoid even longer sentences. Frank was stripped of his badge, his pension, his honor. He was sent to the same state penitentiary where he'd sent my father. The poetic justice was not lost on anyone. But the most important day, the day I had dreamed of for a decade, was the day my father was released. I stood outside the prison gates with my mother. She was crying, but this time they were tears of joy. The heavy metal door creaked open, and he stepped out. He was thinner, older, his hair completely gray. He squinted in the sunlight, as if seeing it for the first time. And then he saw us. He walked towards us, slowly at first, then faster. He embraced my mother, and they held each other, sobbing. Then he turned to me. He looked at me, really looked at me. He saw the man I had become. He saw the uniform I was so proud to wear that day. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. He just put his hands on my shoulders, his strong, honest hands, and his eyes, once so broken, were now filled with the light I thought was gone forever. A light of pride, of love. "My son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My boy." We went home. Not to the old house, but to a new one, a fresh start. It took time for him to heal. The years in prison leave scars you can't see. But he was free. His name was cleared. He never went back to being a mechanic. His hands weren't as steady as they used to be. But he found a new purpose. He started a foundation to help the wrongly convicted. He used his experience, his pain, to help others. He turned his tragedy into a force for good. As for me, I stayed on the force. I earned the respect of my colleagues not as the son of a convicted felon, but as the officer who had the courage to clean up his own house. I worked my way up. I became a detective. I swore to never let what happened to my father happen to anyone else on my watch.
So, what is the lesson in all of this? What is the moral of our story of betrayal and revenge? It's not that revenge is sweet. It can be, in the moment. The look on Frank's face when he was arrested, I'll admit, that was a powerful feeling. But the true justice, the lasting peace, didn't come from his downfall. It came from my father's freedom. It came from restoring his name. It came from the knowledge that I had used the very system that failed him to ultimately save him. Revenge, when driven by blind rage, can destroy you. It can consume you until there's nothing left. But justice pursued with a clear mind, with patience, and with truth as your weapon, that can rebuild a life. That can heal a family. My father was framed because a man in a position of power thought he was above the law. He thought he could play God with people's lives. My revenge was to prove him wrong. to show him that the law, when applied correctly, has no master. It serves only the truth. The world isn't always fair. I learned that at 12 years old. But we don't have to accept it. We can fight back. We can stand up for what's right. We can be the light in the darkness for those who have been wronged. My name is Leo Hale. I am my father's son. And this was his justice.